Welcome to Finlos Reads. In this episode, we're going to hear from my good friend Naeem, who inspired the prior episode of this show and the discussion of Stephen King's The Gunslinger. He and I had a conversation on his thoughts and reactions to the first volume of the Dark Tower series. After that, I will review Snow, Glass, Apples, a graphic novel written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Colleen Doran. Just as a warning, the conversation about The Gunslinger does discuss the entirety of the plot of the book, and so there will be spoilers if you've never read it before. What'd you think of the book?
Man, so I really I enjoyed it. The beginning was very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I think intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't get scared by that. Obviously, authors are going to give you a little bit of mystery. If they're good and they're good about it, they'll give you mystery in the beginning, and let it unfold in the rest of the book.
Yeah.
So I knew that this was just the first book of many.
Mm-hmm.
And after reading, I think there's an introduction and there's a foreword, and in one of them he talked about that this first book is really just a first, basically a first chapter
Right.
into this long saga that he intended to write. So although it did start slow and it did start very confusing, and I really didn't know what was going on. By the end, the pace had picked up considerably. They're running through caves, they're shooting guns, they're really getting after each other. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a long journey, both physically and pacing wise, I think.
Yeah, structurally, what I really love about this first book, just to continue our conversation, like with Star Wars stuff, I think it does extremely well what the A New Hope, like the original Star Wars movie, why that one is my favorite of all the Star Wars movies. Like, I don't think it's the best, but it's my favorite just from a writing standpoint because it is just laser beam focused. The cast of characters is extremely limited. The plot is very, very tense and focused, and there's no empty space, like there's no fluff anywhere. And I really enjoy that from just a narrative perspective, and I really enjoy that about The Gunslinger, because like it just drops you right into it. It expects you to be able to the Stephen King expects you to be able to keep up, or at least be willing to put up with it for a while. But it's a relentless story, and even when so there's never more than 2 or 3 active characters at any given time, which I just think is really cool. But then to get to the ending, and then when Roland wakes up, it's no longer like just this one book, and you see the shore of and the ocean like extending into the distance, and you realize, oh man, there's more. Like that's just a really cool narrative thing, because he stays so focused in this book that it's almost like a misdirection. It's like this is gonna happen. They're gonna Roland's gonna catch the Man in Black. They're gonna fight, and then it's gonna be over. Like a showdown.
I know, and what it wasn't really a letdown. It was just sort of like it was a twist.
Yeah, for sure.
You think this is the ultimate villain that he's going after. You still don't understand what the hell a tower is. You still don't understand what the connection, between this man and the tower is. And then when he meets him, this man is nothing more than apparently a messenger. Yeah, what you said about the characters too, that's true. There really isn't that many. The first character he meets is the dweller in his hut, and then the one part of the book that has a couple characters at the same time is when he goes into the town. Well, he's retelling a story because it's a flashback.
Right.
Before he gets to the hut, he went into town
to Tull, and he meets the girl.
Yeah, he had this brief relationship with this girl who, at first it was, to him, I guess maybe it appeared to him that it was just a sexual relationship,
Right.
but then in the rest of the book, he's always thinking about her and reminiscing and, about
Mm-hmm.
her and some other person, some other woman that we don't really know too much
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a connection there.
yeah.
Uh, so, and I think that actually, that whole section in Tull reveals, I think, honestly, and this is going to be a consistent thing if you do decide to continue. But a consistent weakness of Stephen King is his inability to not inability, his limited ability to portray um characters without explicitly like labeling them by physical quality. So
Mm.
so the what was her name in Tull? Is it Annie, I think is her name?
I think so. Yeah. He described like some scar on her face
Yeah, she
and
would be
uh,
pretty if she wasn't so run down. Like
something like
it's
that.
like oof.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the preacher lady is, obscenely fat but yet entirely like irresistible sexually. It's just all
Yeah.
very very, those are not, I think, Stephen King's best qualities as a writer.
No, and so I was thinking about this because there's another author that I told you about, who is probably almost at as or maybe more prolific as far as the amount that he puts out,
Mhm.
um, which is probably a lot of co-authored stuff. So I don't know if he's necessarily
Yeah.
writing as much as Stephen King, but James Patterson,
Mhm.
I listened to an audiobook and I was really put off
Mhm.
by his descriptions. Every female character was described exactly as you said, but to sort of a nauseating degree. Like,
Right.
here's this character, her description must include her attractiveness on a
Right.
scale of whatever.
Right.
Um, and then, he may get to other attributes, about personality or intelligence or
Mhm.
whatever, but it's always led by attractiveness. Um, and also introducing characters who are not white
Mhm.
by their color,
Mhm.
and introducing characters who are white by everything else but their race.
Right.
Um, uh, in this book, I don't think he described the race of um, of the gunslinger.
Not in the first book.
Okay.
In the second book, you get explicit descriptions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And the in one of the introductions, I don't, maybe it was the first edition of the novel, or just later editions of the different novels. He was like carbon copy of Clint Eastwood from the spaghetti westerns. Um.
Yeah. I mean, in the introduction or forward or whatever it was, I mean, he talked about, um, he wanted to write an epic travel series of books, and he waited, um, because I guess at the time that Lord of the Rings had come out, I mean, there were authors who were, copying the style and creating their own epic travel adventure novels. And he gets, and he says he was egotistical and he wanted to separate, himself from what everyone else was doing. So he waited until he saw, um, you know, spaghetti westerns, and I think specifically The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and that sort of, uh, I guess, setting for his book, but not just the setting, but the tone, right? Because I mean, there are westerns that are goofy as hell, but they're set, in the same time period.
Yeah.
And I mean,
There's an aesthetic.
yeah, I mean, it really came through. I mean, maybe because I knew what he was going for, so I was looking for the similarities. But I mean, just the description of the desert and the heat and the desolation and the desperation of someone traveling through it. I mean, I remember from that movie, the parts where Clint Eastwood, gets dragged through the desert and is thirsty and his face is ruined by thirst and his lips are all cracked. I mean, I think in his description of Roland, I mean, that came through, especially when he made it to the hut and he just barely made it in
Right.
and collapsed in front of the boy. I mean,
Oh,
that's That's what I can imagine, you know.
For sure, and I think up to that point, I think it's 100% intended to be that sort of template, that archetype of the silent gunslinger like Western character. He gets fleshed out a lot more, and once he meets Jake, and then in further books, like the Roland actually gets a lot of depth, and he's actually doing something very similar to what Tolkien was doing with Lord of the Rings, where he wants to kind of create his own mythology. So Stephen King is he is borrowing sort of like the best elements of all of these different American mythologies. So there's elements from The Wizard of Oz, there's elements from the spaghetti westerns, there's elements from like The Godfather. He's really kind of trying to he's definitely trying to create this sort of his own version of that story.
Yeah.
The walking man with this very specific goal down the road. But yeah, I think once we get Jake into the story, Roland's demeanor completely changes, and I think it's just a really interesting aspect to the story. And but I think Jake really changes things for Roland.
The tone shift for sure was there, and it was intentional, and there
Hmm.
was a lot, you know, about that. You know, all of a sudden, it wasn't as if he had, you know, a love interest, right? Who earlier had gone crazy or was possessed and turned on him, who he had
Hmm.
to kill.
Hmm.
He had a child.
Right.
I mean, a boy, a helpless boy who was there, whose presence was quite obviously the result of the Man in Black.
Right.
I mean, I think he knew that right away, that this boy was put here by him and put there as something, as a trap or a way to slow him down or a way. Um, I think he foreshadowed a choice he would have to make, and even the boy realized at some point that he would be, um, you know, a sacrifice. Um, but despite knowing that, you know, you saw him soften over time. Um, and I don't think he felt bad about it. I mean, I think he was conflicted about it, but I don't think he felt really like super strongly like it was making him a weaker or worse person.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, starting out with the tragic story of the boy right away, um, and figuring out that the boy was dead or revived or transported there somehow or
That yeah,
frozen in time.
and I think you even mentioned like the description of him getting run over. That's a pretty intense
It was
graphic
graphic.
description. Yeah, it's very graphic.
It was extremely graphic,
Yeah.
and the boy asked not to remember it,
Yeah.
which, you know, I think is a good logical choice for anybody. You know, if you have the choice of forgetting something so horrible. Um, so he starts off with that. You know, you immediately sympathize with the boy. Um, you know, and I think anybody would sympathize and want to care for others. But I mean, you know, and I hate to say this because I hated when parents would say this when I didn't have kids. But I mean, having a kid really changes the way you feel about children,
Yep.
and seeing children and knowing really how helpless children are.
Hmm.
So seeing a boy with no one to care for him out in the middle of the desert is going to, you know, is going to tug at heartstrings. So yeah, I mean, I think it was an easy, you know, sympathetic character for anybody, but I mean, I think especially for parents, you know,
Yep.
seeing a helpless child, you know, is going to make them obviously really feel for that character.
He can create such a well-rounded, believable character. And even in that moment when we were talking about when he drops Jake on the from the bridge, and Jake says just that killer last line, like there are other worlds than this. It's like, and you know he's gonna do it, and
Yeah,
you hate him for it, but you still like there was never any choice. Like this was never not gonna happen,
right.
and so that
But
whole
but up until that point, you were sort of hoping,
you were
and
hoping,
you were given hope. You were given. I mean, you know, so it wasn't as if um it was still a surprise. Let me put it that way. I mean, like afterwards, you're like, okay, yeah, it was going to happen, but like it was still a good buildup of tension up to the
and
moment.
that's what it is because up to that point there were several occasions when Roland could have not done stuff, like when when Jake gets attacked by the demon, and Roland really puts himself at risk to save Jake.
Yeah.
And then when they go into the like there are genuine moments when Roland goes out of his way to care for this child. Like he obviously
Well, so yeah, because even you're right, because in the sequence of events before he gets dropped off the bridge, you're going. I mean, in the train ride
right,
through the tunnel, they get attacked by the mutants,
right,
and at several points, Roland could have just left him there
yep,
to the mutants. And, obviously that would have been horrible, but I mean, he risked his life to save the boy when he could have saved his life very easily. And because the mutants were slow moving,
yeah, the slow muties.
he he could have gone on, but he saved him. And then they get to the station, and they sort of that's what confused me even more, because like, well, is this our world or someone else's world? Because
Ooh,
these people,
yeah, mm-hmm.
this is a fossilized train station. It's been there for so long that they touch a newspaper and it turns into dust. And there's skeletons everywhere. But there's one part in there that was kind of funny, because as a parent, everyone does this. Your kid doesn't want to leave somewhere, and you're like, all right, bye, and you start walking away, and they're going to follow you.
Yep.
And he does that with him, so it's kind of funny, but also it was also sort of shrouded in this sort of despair, because the kid knew something bad was coming and knew that Roland would have to make a choice.
It's like
Um,
the closer you get to the moment, the more ill at ease Jake becomes. Like he senses it coming,
right, right.
and
But
and
he
it,
but he follows him anyways. I
of
mean,
course he
well, what
does.
else was he going to do? Stay
Right,
stay in a station and
right,
starve? I mean,
right.
he had to go.
Yeah,
But
and that says something about Jake's character. And it also says like it's a bizarre sort of tension to hold, because it's going to happen, but yet Roland seems to be fighting it, and it's only when it becomes like a binary choice. It's like save the boy, lose the tower, or drop the boy and potentially see the tower. Like that's it. It's just a binary
right,
choice. The ending is, I honestly think, is the weakest part. It's a really powerful moment. And I'm not saying that what happens is weak. I'm just saying how the book ends is sort of weak, because it's like
right.
he's like, okay, I reached the end of this chapter. I've got like 300 pages. I'm just gonna stop here. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah. He was basically like, I've read enough.
yeah. And that's Stephen King does that. That's actually his thing. And if you ever read his book about writing, like that's he's like, I suck at writing endings. But
Mm.
yeah, it's cool. I really enjoy it. I'm glad that you're reading it, and more than anything, it's just cool to talk about it with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm in. I mean, I don't understand everything, but I want him to explain things, because I know they're going to be interesting.
Okay, so before I begin, a little disclaimer. I'm a really big Neil Gaiman fan. So keep that in mind as I go into this, because that's obviously going to be a little bit of a bias for me. But that doesn't make everything that he writes perfect. This story, Snow, Glass, Apples, I first read it in the collection Smoke and Mirrors, which is a collection of short stories by Neil Gaiman, which was published in 1998. And honestly, I didn't really remember it until I read the graphic novel. I think that when you have authors who are fairly well established, like Neil Gaiman, who has won numerous awards, his works have been adapted into all sorts of media, from comics and graphic novels to films. You have a certain level of freedom to really do what you'd like to do. But at the same time, there's an expectation that all of the work that you produce comes out amazing, that you are top tier. What's cool about short story collections, they're often a lot more experimental, a lot more niche, and they sometimes deal with topics that might not be as popular with mainstream audiences. And Smoke and Mirrors is no different. So the original Snow, Glass, and Apples was published in that collection of short stories. This adaptation, this graphic novel, illustrated and adapted by Colleen Doran, captures the essence of that short story and streamlines it. Most of the details are intact and are done so largely through the illustrations, so that the text that is there, directly lifted from the short story, is sparse but serves to support and give structure to the stunning artwork that is present in this book. Having some knowledge of the Grimm's fairy tale version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is essential for really, I think, getting the most value out of this work. It really is leaning on the assumption that the reader will not only have seen the Disney version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but will have been exposed in some form to the Grimm's fairy tale version as well. And it's really important because it is leaning on that foreknowledge, specifically with aspects of the background of the two main characters, Snow White and the Queen. And of course, traditionally, we view Snow White as the protagonist and victim of the antagonist, the evil queen, who is seeking to consume Snow White's heart to both get rid of a challenger of beauty, but also to achieve immortality. The witch is portrayed as an evil witch who is able to do magical feats. So, in this version of the story, Neil Gaiman has sort of swapped the roles of these characters. It's making so the queen is a witch, but one who uses traditional folk magic, and Snow White instead is the villain of the story. And this is something that we see more commonly done now, especially with recent Disney works like Maleficent. But it is important to see that Gaiman was doing this in the late 90s. It's really cool to see how his storytelling has had an impact in that way. The story itself is interesting. Again, it's a reversal of the traditional Snow White narrative, which is interesting in and of itself. It really leans into some dark territory. There are elements which are definitely gory and macabre, and the artwork definitely captures that brilliantly. I think the artwork in this book is absolutely stunning. Doran uses vibrant colors and very much an Art Deco style to create a sense of magic, but one that is not outside the realm of natural form, if that makes sense. The people are illustrated in fairly normal proportions beyond their obvious beauty, beyond normal standards, but the art style itself is clean and vibrant. My favorite page spread is in the first part of the book. On one page, you have an illustration showing the main character who has been recently wed to the king. They are both drawn with these intersecting lines, and the colors are very cool, and it is highlighting the sadness present in that scene. But on the next page, the opposite page, the lines are curving and they're more organic in nature, and the colors are warm and vibrant. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition of these two pages, where it really highlights the strength of art for this artist. Prior to this book, I was not familiar with Colleen Doran, but she is a prominent illustrator and artist, and I definitely will look into other works that she has done. Overall, I think that the book is an enjoyable read. It is a brief read. It's a one-volume graphic novel in hardback that is published by Dark Horse Comics, and the presentation is absolutely beautiful. I think it is worth it for the art alone, but it is definitely buoyed by Neil Gaiman's typical fantastical writing style, emphasizing things that make us very uncomfortable. There are scenes that are gory, there are scenes that are on the edge of erotic, and it is interesting to see how those elements can surprise and upend our traditional notions of what this fairy tale and this folk tale have become in, pop culture. So again, that sort of challenge to how we anticipate seeing these traditional stories told, I think, is worthy of study, if for nothing else. A treat that the book contains is the artist Colleen Doran includes some pages towards the end of the book where she talks about her process of creating the artwork and adapting the book, and it provides some studies that she did throughout the process, and so that makes for a really interesting read as well. I always enjoy getting an idea of the artistic process that different people go through. I hope this review has been helpful. Again, the book is called Snow Glass Apples. I don't like the title. I think it's kind of an awkward thing to say, but that's what it is. Don't let the title stop you. It is a beautifully rendered work in terms of its art style, and it features classic strong writing from Neil Gaiman. If you're a fan of either of these people, either Neil Gaiman or Colleen Doran, I think it's a worthy addition to your library. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me again.